All right, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order and ask each of the members of the subcommittee to go ahead and introduce themselves. My name is Roy Dahl. I represent Hillcrest and I'm chairing the subcommittee.
This is Clint Daniels with subcommittee.
Gail Freed, I live in Hillcrest.
Bill Ellig, University Heights.
So Tom Mulaney, Uptown Community.
Okay.
Brad Marsh.
Okay.
Matt Medeiros.
All right. So I will now turn it over to our illustrious city planner, Michael. Do you want to introduce the program for tonight?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, though I'd correct the record, just regular planner, not illustrious, but good evening, everyone. Michael Prins with the City of San Diego's Planning Department, project manager for the Hillcrest Focused Amendment. Me tonight, the presenters are Scott Sandell, Parks Planner, and Brad Lentz with Spurlock Poirier. We have Gabriela Folino here, as well as other members of our team, including Diego Velasco and Monique Chen. We're looking forward to presenting on sort of refinements and updates to our public space concepts. And Brad, if you want to share your screen, go through the presentation.
Sure, pop this up.
So normally we try and get the presentation, a day in advance. And unfortunately, due to last minute refinements and reevaluation of some of the concepts, we were not able to do that for this month's meeting, but we will, look to keep on track for future meetings so that the presentation is presented in advance where possible. A copy of the presentation is going to be available on planhillcrest.org, as well as a recording of this meeting and other materials that, that'll be developed as well. Brad, when you're ready to go, you can share your screen. I can just sort of talk to the presentation and then we'll turn it over to Scott. So we've gone ahead and done introductions. We're going to recap the December meeting input, and then really what we're going to talk about tonight is opportunities related to urban greening and the tree canopy, sort of where we see potentials for urban corridors and linear parks, and sort of what could occur in those areas, as well as looking at sort of the different focus areas and the park opportunities that are included sort of on the east of 163 and then north of Washington and south of Washington. And then finally, just allow for a discussion of subcommittee and public comment and get into next steps. So as I mentioned, we want to provide an overview of the public realm, parks and public space and urban greening concepts, or things that we are looking to change or address through this effort. We want to discuss the opportunities by the typology and the potential locations for where that it could occur. And then we're hoping the takeaway tonight is to provide feedback that would sort of guide the design of new public spaces and parks in Hillcrest. And then what we'll take away from that is sort of further refinement of not only the concepts themselves, but also any sort of implementation tools that would, sort of be developed through the plan amendment process and the focused amendment process. So, we've talked about the objectives every meeting, and just sort of to focus on, the objectives of the Plan Hillcrest effort is to celebrate the LGBTQ plus legacy and community that exists, support local businesses and address housing needs. But tonight's the focus here is on creating public spaces and parks and really strengthening connections through improvements in the public right-of-way and the public realm. So that's really the focus of the meeting tonight. And with that, Scott can cover the December meeting.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I just wanted to have a slide here where we reiterate some of the things we talked about in December. And as we go through the presentation, we have a packed agenda for tonight and a lot of slides to go through. So we will go through fast a little bit of the stuff that we looked at last time we talked about parks, and then we'll slow down and go slow when we hit the real beef of tonight's presentation. But we in December, we talked about park locations, and we talked about it in proximity to development intensities. We talked about incentivizing during the implementation process, multi-generational design, places for all ages, and also universal access and ADA compliance and beyond. We talked a lot about public restrooms, that they're desirable and not necessarily frowned upon if they're in the right locations. We talked about being sure we include technology, Wi-Fi and power outlets and things that are like of that nature along these streetscape projects we're talking about. Also, we talked about utilizing parking lots and street rights of way for parks and plazas, and really trying to look under every stone. We also wanted to create a comprehensive open space system. So with that, we'll kind of start talking about that. Next slide. One of the first things we wanted to kind of talk about tonight was the urban forest and urban greening. We talked about that a little before, and this slide represented where we were in terms of our CAP goals, the climate action plan. Where we are in 2020 is close to 15%, and the goal in 2035 is 35%. You can kind of see what that looks like in the community. We also talked about some current street tree plans and what was in the community plan. Some of the things we've talked about here adding are in red, and we can go to the next slide to show what we're thinking about there. We want to possibly define some additional primary streets for urban greening and street tree types and many different things, including Washington, Normal, and Front Street. And we also want to talk to you about some green street connectors to Balboa Park. They go east-west and north-south. You can see those in green at Park, Richmond, Upas, and Spruce. Some of the things we want to talk about are sustainability that we want to address with the urban canopy and with urban greening, stormwater savings, energy savings, urban heat island reduction, and the things that we're all very aware of with trees. And you kind of see it, a little bit of graph there on Santa Monica's Urban Forest Master Plan about some of those benefits. Flash through a few photos in the community where we can see definite room for improvement here at Washington. And the next slide as well, we want to show like what, different neighborhoods, rather different parts of the neighborhood could include double rows of street trees, whether they be formally the same species or, an eclectic mix with the consistent street tree being at the street. With this, I kind of wanted to eventually hand off to my cohort with Spurlock, but with this, I'd like to kind of talk about some urban greening opportunities we have in parks and open spaces. We have some places like this, and these pictures begin to show things that look like Southern California, because we can really, in Southern California, have good canopy so that we can really have shady places for people to sit and gather. And then lastly, I'll hand it off to Brad in a second here, but just wanted to remind everybody that we have programs in the city such as this, the free tree residential program, and we can get into a little bit later in different sessions, but how we might be able to organize tree plantings in the community. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brad.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. So just kind of as a point of where we were last time, we had talked about sort of the various typologies and shown examples of each of these various typologies, and thinking that, all these really are what sort of make up a complete street system, sort of looking at streets, parks, plazas, paseos, and other recreational opportunities. And one of the things we really wanted to start looking at was some of the connectors. And I know that this came up in the February meeting as we were talking about urban form and urban design. And we've started to identify what we're sort of defining as two kind of linear connectors or sort of setback zones. The first we're calling the urban corridor, and really thinking about this more as kind of a major connector, that it's roughly about a 15 to 25 foot wide zone. And really it's a connector, so it's got a wider sort of pedestrian walkway. There's potential for cafe seating in what we call sort of the frontage zone, the walkway and the throughway zone, and then sort of the urban greening opportunities and sort of a furnishing tree planting zone adjacent to the curb. And thinking that, the width of this, ideally we'd like to have sort of 15 feet minimum where we're trying to create these urban connectors or urban corridors. But there's potential if you can get wider setbacks, that you may be able to sort of widen the frontage zone for cafe, widen throughway zones, or widen parkways to get larger street trees. And potentially in even some of the wider areas, we could accommodate sort of second rows of street trees in this location. The sort of second type, which we would say is a little bit more kind of robust version of kind of a urban frontage, or sort of is what we would call the linear park. And this is roughly sort of a 25-foot minimum to kind of a 35-foot zone that would be from curb edge to sort of building face. And I'll just kind of put the asterisk on there that this is all sort of, preliminary and pending mobility considerations, coordination with fire departments, because there's a ladder access reach. We know that they do allow up to 35 feet and 40 with some exceptions, but really it's similar to an urban trail. You've got kind of your frontage, furnishing planting zone in the front, kind of a clear walkway and throughway zone that is your clear sidewalk. Potential for sort of second street trees, but then you have the sort of larger activity zone or frontage zone. And this really can house sort of a number of different things, from sort of recreational amenities to, play areas, plazas, seating, performance areas, art. It could be community gardens, sort of a number of the things we had talked about last time. And we've started identifying locations that might want to be defined as sort of linear parks as shown in green. So looking at potentially Washington Street, the eastern half of University along sort of the north side. We all know that Normal Street and the Normal Street Promenade really is sort of this linear park condition already that's proposed and moving forward, versus sort of the urban corridors. And these are a little bit more constrained in terms of sort of the right-of-way frontage. So that's why we don't think that urban linear parks are really appropriate in some of these areas, but we've heard a lot of feedback about sort of making connections on, say, like 4th, 5th, and 6th, potentially looking at Richmond Street and Park Boulevard as sort of major connectors to Balboa Park. And then looking at how can we integrate things like Front Street, which connect to the Mission Hills Library, and First Avenue, which are close to Florence Elementary School, and possibly even looking at sort of expanding to the north to sort of create these connections between the various sub areas. And so I think a little bit later we'll sort of talk about whether or not there's other streets that might want to be sort of more of these corridors and connectors, but really thinking about how can you sort of grab these urban areas and then also help them link these various open spaces that we're going to show and discuss in a little bit. And one of the other thing that we think is important really with these sort of urban connectors and features is the inclusion of sort of art and that you've already got this in the alleys. Are there ways to sort of bring this out into the streetscape and make it part of the sort of public realm and the experience of sort of walking and having sort of art walks that might be a part of these sort of urban corridors or linear park features themselves. And then just kind of a reminder of, the Normal Street Promenade. I'm sure that most people here, everybody here is really aware of it as sort of the, prototypical sort of linear park that is being developed right now. And we wanted to build on this a little bit in terms of what you saw last time. So to describe the linear parks in a little more detail, I believe that Diego had shown some of the urban form and kind of the setbacks with the high-rise development that could potentially occur, looking at, this is University and Park. And the idea was that, instead of having an open space kind of behind on the north end of the building, that if we actually push the building back a little bit, we can get a wider zone in front that would allow us to do the University Avenue linear park and sort of the series of the procession down University Avenue. And not necessarily saying that this park is going to be contiguous, as, some of the parcels have already redeveloped and, aren't likely to, have available width. And the first area that we were starting to look at as you sort of work your way was the intersection really at University and Normal, with the new Normal Street Promenade coming in, and thinking about this intersection as a potential major plaza or sort of significant park opportunity that really could be sort of an event space, building upon what we had heard last time, that there could be the potential to have sort of amphitheater step seating or something here to really sort of create kind of a key focal point at this intersection between these two sort of linear park locations. Moving down the street, the sort of other green bars is where we're looking at the potential 25 to 35 foot wide linear park spaces that would be in the setback from the curb to the setback of the building. And thinking about these zones really as sort of, enhanced opportunities for trees, really looking at, the variety of uses that could be in here, from seating and dining to art to community gardens to recreational amenities, and sort of thinking about this as all places for all ages, but also just sort of a great connector and ability to sort of, walk down the street in a very safe manner. And just sort of a zoom in of what that, potentially could look like in more detail. Obviously, the program could vary here. And then the final area is sort of looking at corner plazas, opportunities for, entries of buildings, or even sort of what we're calling sort of like mini parks, which you'll start to see in the next zone, that could be spaces between buildings that could be a little bit more substantial, that are located off of this kind of connector piece. So they're areas that are tucked away from the street a little bit more, and off of the sort of main linear park corridor passageway, and maybe sort of concentrated around retail or other activity or hub areas, or even sort of community centers, such as like the center location as well here too. And in terms of talking about implementation tools or potential implementation tools we had talked about, that there's multiple ways that we can do this, or start looking at this, including reconfiguration of parking or roads, of course, in concert with the mobility concepts. Looking at having setback requirements for development that may vary in width depending on the land use or type or intensity or parcel size. Also thinking about development incentives for developers, whether they're providing open space on their private land and maintaining it, or other sort of pieces of affordable housing or other things like that that may be a benefit. And then also looking at open space easements and ways to sort of put a easement over a private land that would preserve the park as open space in perpetuity. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott to talk a little bit more about sort of the specific concepts in sort of these various sub areas. We can dive into the overall park system a little more.
Thanks, Brad. And I appreciate you kind of leaving us with that slide of all the different possible implementation tools that we have in our toolbox. Here, as we look at the kind of the northeast quadrant here, next to Park Boulevard on the right, Washington Street on the top there, we're beginning to see some of those things that we just talked about in possible symbols on the plan. And again, this is a plan, as will be the next couple that we'll look at, that begin to look at some of the opportunities that we're looking at. And so we're looking at things from, what might be possible, and we might winnow it down to things that are, depending on feedback and what might be feasible. But you can begin to see that we're looking at linear parks. Those are the things that are real, the beef of it all. Proposed parks from the community planner identified in the plan, of course. Urban corridors, like we've been talking about, for urban streetscapes with urban greening concepts, potential mini parks and corner plazas, but also paseos, street closures that are possible, privately owned, public open space, joint use opportunities in community buildings, and that kind of thing are on here. So with that, we can always quickly go back. I just wanted to run through all the areas, and then we can come back and look at any of them. But you can kind of see some of the photos, show some of the opportunity types that we've been talking about. Go to the next slide here, and we can then look at on the west side from Washington Street south towards downtown and Balboa Park. Here we can also begin to see that, again, on Washington Street, we're showing that there might be a linear park. Again, we're showing on the south side, but it could be, it could alternate. We might have a good spot if we're able to capture a couple of the opportunities that we have on the north side to increase it there. But at the very least, I think on Washington, we would have at least an urban corridor in that situation on the north side. But as we go further down, of course, then begin to look into, like Brad mentioned before, Florence Elementary is a key location, and the possibility of doing joint use there. So you can kind of see that there might be some opportunities there to connect. As you look at University, we're also looking to see, you can kind of see where we're calling paseos in some of the alleys. And I think if you can recall some of the images that Brad showed earlier about what we might be able to do in alleys, if we leave them open, certainly they can be fun, wonderful public places that we go to. And again, as we go further south of University, we can begin to see that we have some potential sites that are from the community plan, and sites that we've identified that might be smaller mini parks or pocket parks. And also a possible street closure, which we have a slide to show you a little bit later too, what some of those opportunities might be there between 5th and 6th. So with that, let's go to the next page, and we can kind of wrap up, and we can come back to these maps because these are really important to get some of your feedback on. Here you can kind of see at the UCSD north side of Washington that, we've got a lot of open space, habitat, MHPA lands that surround some of the mesa there. But we're also showing some connections north-south on Front and Fourth. So that could be real interesting to get into as we get also a little bit further towards Washington. You can begin to see that we're really looking at where might we be able to do corner plazas on that corridor. And in doing so, we might be able to have a kind of a string of pearls, if you will, of smaller parks and places to gather and stuff like that. But they together have a synergy, and that they might be able to be places that are identified that come together. Let's see. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide then. I wanted to see if we can't, if you would, get some feedback from the committee, and if we would like to go back to any of the slides that we have, whether those be the last 3 slides or the next ones. But yeah, so we have a couple suggested topics to get some feedback: the urban greening feedback on trees, tree canopy, urban greening, and also the linear park, the urban corridors, and the locations as well. So not just the corridors and the streetscapes, but any of the places that we've identified. So we can send it back to Roy, Chair. Do you want to ask and invite photos, or rather questions of anybody?
Give me 1 second. I'm going to unmute Roy.
All right, so
yeah.
So obviously it's going to be a little awkward till we get used to this new thing. So if people aren't familiar, there's a reaction button on the bottom of your screen where you can raise your hand to be recognized. I see that Clint has raised his hand, but I'd like to get people, the community members first, and then the subcommittee members. So are there any community members who would like to raise their hand and get recognized? I see Mary and Lou. So Michael, you're going to have to do the unmuting.
Yep, I'm keeping track. I asked Mary to unmute, and then Lou, I will call on you next.
Hi everybody. I'm here in my warm robe because I've been freezing today, even though it's been a beautiful day. Anyway, that's why I've been blacked out. My question is about upkeep. If we are able to do all these wonderful things with trees, dual line trees, if we have a big enough passageway or whatever, whose responsibility is it for upkeep of all that greenery?
I could take that question. It's a really good question because there's more than one answer. If a lot of these places we're looking at would occur in concert with new projects that come along. So if a new project comes along and they were able to build a facility, for example, like any of the facilities on the left side of your screen there, on their site, we would hope that those would be maintained by the project that's getting credit for their park credit, or partial park credit for those spaces. Other trees would be maintained by the BID, the Business Improvement District, if they're in their jurisdictional places to maintain. And then also they'd be for Parks and Rec or Transportation, Stormwater, if they were in other city parcels. And if they're on private property, just plain private property, then those would be private property maintained.
I think Lou was next.
Thanks. I appreciate Mary's question. I think maintenance is not just taking care of the trees, although that was useful to specify, but also maintenance of these parks and areas. And some of the answers you gave about trees, I think would apply, but not all. And also enforcement of that maintenance, particularly with private property owners. But I wanted to go back to a couple of other things. You had a slide of input that you'd gotten in the previous meeting, but some of those issues maybe weren't addressed differently, or again, this meeting, things like restrooms, there were a whole list of them that you had on the slide. And I think it would be useful to go through how some of those fit with these. And particularly, I see linear parks and street things and corners, but what about parks? Is there just, is the opinion of the Planning Commission that there's just no room for any parks of any size of a real park in the area with the kind of amenities that you might expect and that might have universal design and multi-generational and restrooms and technology and all of that good stuff? I understand that pieces of that could happen in some of these little pieces, but and I like the idea of a string of pearls. It sounds great, but you kind of, you know, it's like having a nice necklace and there's a pendant. Okay, so thanks.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, I hear you.
One last thing I wanted to ask about is when you just throw in the reconfiguration of parking and developer incentives, a little more detail on what that might involve, because those sound like pretty big issues affecting things that you're talking about, like mobility and all of that. Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks. Really good questions. I don't expect any bad questions tonight at all, but in particular, I wanted to hit on the kind of the maintenance of parks, which is a little bit different than trees, because the parks would generally be, and I'll talk now about the parks that we've been kind of talking about here in the system of the urban corridors and linear parks that are on streets. So these are largely going to be parks that are within the public right of way, and then they adjoin a public or a project that might participate in this, in which they have a plaza or a small little pocket park. And in those situations, we've had a lot of folks want to get credit on site for their project. You know, it adds value to their project, it adds value to the neighborhood, of course. But in those cases, we've been working with a lot of property development people and making sure that there's maintenance in perpetuity, which is not easy for me to say, on those projects. And so then getting to your other question about the bigger parks, right? So I think that's why Brad really quickly tried to get to this plan, because we definitely have some ideas for real parks. I'm gonna say that linear parks and these little places to gather are real parks too, but you know, it's harder. Like I agree to fit a playground in or something that you can really need a little bit more elbow room to do. So that's what these green, what are those little round cloud kind of figures on there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think on this, 9, 10 on this this area alone. And so these are small parks. So we also, you know, not to say that we're eliminating any of the parks that were previously on the community plan that were identified, and some of those, you know, that were in the plan from a few years back are now being implemented as they go into regional development plan process and everything. But I do want to kind of stress that it's everything, all the above. We don't want to just go for any kind of low-hanging fruit or anything that's small because it's easy, but we definitely want to, you know, on these streets that we all use and can identify with, be able to have things on the street and then that work perpendicular off into the street that can go into a park facility, but all that. You had a question too about parking reconfiguration, how that might work. Well, we don't have too many places where we have parking reconfiguration where we might be able to take parking. I know that's a big subject sometimes, right? But if there's not a lot of retail in a particular location, or if there's just an opportunity where there's only 1.5 parking spaces in, you know, sometimes there's driveways and things where it's not very efficient, we might be able to pick up little bits of space from parking in that way. And you'll hear more in the next few months from the mobility folks.
All right, we need to get the rest of the questions before we get too long of answers.
Okay. But did I answer all your questions on this?
We have some other people that wanted to speak.
Yeah,
Michael,
go for
you're the Matt. You can free people up and let them know they're ready.
I will be the MC. I think Ken is next, so let me get to him. Actually, I had Sanjay and then Saul and then Ken. So, sorry.
If everybody has a slide they need me to go to, just let me know and I'll re-navigate.
Hi, Sanjay Stone.
Sorry.
What's that?
I apologize for butchering your name.
Oh, no, it's fine. No, I thank you. But I really like the idea of the parks and the greenways and the urban corridors. One thing that I would ask is the connections between Hillcrest and the plan here and into Mission Hills and the North Park, University Heights and Bankers Hill. Have we looked to make sure that those urban corridors are well aligned? Because I noticed like on one, like the urban corridor, I think on like slide 4 or 5 actually stops on First Street and doesn't go all the way to Albatross. It stops right at Florence Elementary, and it doesn't go past Florence Elementary, even though I know living in because I live just in Mission Hills, just down the street. I know when Florence was open, a lot of the parents would be walking that way, you know, along that. So it, to me, like making sure that we have, you know, all the urban corridors. And also has there been any discussions with the hospital? Because I know UCSD is doing their update and they're making a large green open space as a part of their final project done. Is there any plans to incorporate that into park space?
Yes. So to answer your questions,
Michael, let's let everybody talk and then we'll answer as many questions as we can.
okay, I'll come. Sure. We can come back to him, but I will respond to those questions.
Who's next?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I was unmuted myself. Saul's next.
My comment is just that if Michael could make Roy a co-host, he might have more control for him to speak later in the meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, next.
Ken is next.
You're on mute. You got to unmute yourself.
Okay. I'm concerned about the transient loitering, especially around the hospital areas. And because we have so much, I can see just driving up and down 5th, 6th, and Washington Street, so many people coming out of that hospital area. And then I'm noticing all the pictures where it doesn't have as many trash cans lining the streets and public restrooms for people to use instead of defecating on the streets. That's my concern.
Thanks. Who's next?
Bill is next.
Do you want me to wait until for the board members?
Well, go ahead, Bill.
Okay. No, thanks for all of this. Definitely the greening of the area, I think, is really important as we're getting into the more trees. Concern that I have is in more the core of Hillcrest with you have some streets that are possibly being closed, but I see in the future that's going to be a major density area, and as a result, a higher portion of open space, parks, linear parks, or whatever paseos are really going to be needed within this section here. I think there's a lot of opportunity over on the east side, Normal Street going all the way up to Park Boulevard, but I think more effort needs to be done in identifying areas on the west of the 163 for these. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we can start to go to the board members.
Well, we do have in the chat, Gail says she has a question on Normal Street. So I will unmute Sharon. And then Carol had a question, and Matt Wallstrom also had a question. And Matt, I think he wanted to type his question in the comment section, and I can read that. But Sharon, go ahead, please.
Okay. About Normal Street. I know that Hillcrest CDC worked with the community for years to come up with plans for Normal Street. The city took those plans and developed them further. Are you using those in this? Are you going to be using those plans in Plan Hillcrest, or are you just starting all over again?
We're not starting all over again. We will be using those plans and building on them.
Thank you.
Okay, let me find Carol. Go ahead, Carol. Carol, you're unmuted.
Hello?
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, this is all very beautiful, but I've noticed you have not addressed the largest section of what you're defining as Hillcrest, and almost a third of that section is the medical complex area. And I want to know more about how they are going to be incorporated into the area and follow through on what Ken was mentioning. There are so many people on our streets now and in our alleys now that have been released from the emergency rooms, that have been in the psychiatric units, which are, as I understand it, expanding. And they're released without being totally okay. And it's causing a lot of problems. And you can look, I don't know exactly how you can tell how many issues there are, because these are not reported, like they're not crimes, but you have to call the PERT team, the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team. And there are a number of other groups and outreach teams that will come and help when you've got people laying around on the street crying and screaming and cussing and doing everything you can imagine. We need to address that problem as you are expanding. We need bathrooms. We need places for people to be taken care of. We need like a little substation where there are emergency people that can come and help when there are issues. So I hope you can start to address those kinds of issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Next, who else? Do we have any other general public comments before we go to the board?
The only, let's see if, all right, Matt Wallstrom said, following up on Lou's comments regarding development incentives and quotations, for these setbacks, you mentioned open space easements and affordable housing as possibilities, but not allowing extra height and density, which is the path of least resistance that's usually followed. I'm concerned that the latter will be the de facto course pursued and would want to see that spelled out rather than speculative. So thank you for your comment, Matt. Do you want me to respond to?
No, I want you to hold it. Let's get the board comments and I'll give you a chance to respond after you've heard the rest of everybody else.
Sounds good.
So Clint was next.
Clint and then Breer.
All right, let me turn my video on here. So, okay. So thanks. I have a couple of points, just one out of the gate. I want to go back to the Zoom bomb. I know that I speak probably for everybody on the board, and I know I speak for the folks of the city of San Diego, that is not representative of who we are as a board, and that this board is focused on being inclusive and appreciating that the contributions from everybody. And so I just want to, I know it's probably an unspoken truth, but I just wanted to put it out there as a spoken that doesn't represent who we are. So beyond that, in terms of what was presented tonight, I want to hit a couple of key points or a couple of small points out of the gate. One on the trees, I think it was something that somebody had said earlier, which is that how are those trees going to be maintained? I remember having a conversation with Gail a couple of years ago, standing around the trees in front of the new fire station number 5 as they were wilting away. And so just how are we going to water those trees and how are we going to maintain those trees? I think is super important. Number 2, don't be afraid with some of those plans of taking street sidewalks, putting bigger sidewalks out there. Don't be afraid to take away the road right of way for cars in favor of people and pedestrians and folks enjoying themselves outside of a car. The one concern I have is around the major corridors, and I know this is probably not the intent, but I just want to say this explicitly, that major corridors doesn't mean bigger streets for cars. So when we talk about major urban corridors for First Avenue or Fourth Avenue or whatever that means, is that let's not forget that we're talking about creating spaces for people, and that doesn't mean that major urban corridors means bigger streets. The last thing I just wanted to point out is that we've heard a couple of comments about housing or about parks or the need of dealing with the homeless in terms of more bathrooms. A substation was what somebody just said. And the one thing that we forget is that people need a place to live. And so we should not let parks be the inhibitor of more housing. Housing is what folks need. We have a housing crisis. So given the benefit of the finance of creating more public spaces, which I'm completely in agreement with, that should not come at the expense of creating more housing opportunities for folks to live so that they don't have to live on the streets. And I think the last thing I would just leave on is that I know it's a regional asset, but we shouldn't forget that we live on the proximity of Balboa Park, and Balboa Park provides a huge opportunity for open space within this community. But again, at the end of the day, we have a housing crisis, we don't have a parks crisis. And so we need to do whatever we can to figure out how to put people in housing. And so again, at the end of the day, if given the choice between parks and housing, I'm gonna pick housing. So, thanks.
Brer, you're next.
Hi, everyone. This is a great presentation, and I just want to really quickly give you compliments on some of the things I saw. Infiltration basins on the side of the road are great. Imperial Beach has a lot of these. I absolutely love them. All of the linear park ideas, fantastic. I'd love to see some more Vision Zero strategies worked in here. I did see some bulb outs on some corners, but I'd like to make sure that some more of those design ideas incorporated. I'd really like to acknowledge what Carol said about the Scripps Medical Center. She made a really great point there. And I just want to let everyone know that we're going to be talking about that project in design review. And so make sure you're on the mailing list and look out for that if you'd like to come and comment, because we'll be talking with the architect and the client there to give them some feedback on what we would like to see on their project. Regarding implementation, I'll second what Clint said. Having linear parks is fantastic. I love them. I love the way Barcelona's done it. I want to see more of that. But increasing setbacks to accommodate this is going to impact property owners' ability to redevelop those properties. And on the subject of redevelopment, I'd like to ask the team if they have thought of, or if there's any potential to implement some sort of value capture. There's going to be a lot of upzoning happening in certain areas. And this upzoning is essentially equivalent to a windfall to that property owner by increasing the amount of units they can build on this property, and therefore increasing the property's intrinsic value. So figuring out some sort of mechanism, which has been done in other places, to help recapture some of that windfall to put toward these projects. I would really like to hear about the potential of doing that. And then just really quickly, you showed some slides with some potential pocket parks, one of which was next to the 163, kind of near the on-ramp. The other was on Robinson near 6th. And, I would love to see park spaces like this, small or large, but I have strong reservations about placing park space next to areas with high traffic. If you're going to put a park there, like for example at Robinson and 6th, then something needs to be done about the traffic volume. It needs to be slowed down. Right turns on red need to be banned. There needs to be serious steps taken to control the speed and the flow of traffic through there, because you're going to have people and dogs and cars and kids, all circling around these public spaces. So I would really like to see a a large effort made to, rein in the sort of fast moving traffic. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Looks like Tom is next. You're gotta unmute yourself, Tom. It didn't work. Try again.
Second. There we go. Thank you. I really appreciate with Brer's comments. I think standing next to a busy street is unpleasant, and it can be dangerous. If you had a couple parents and 3 kids and you're only 3 feet from a busy street, it's something we need to try to guard against. Traffic calming, certainly. Some cases, these green spaces can be located back a little bit, as the consultant showed. Land value recapture. So there's been discussions recently between an urban planning professor, Dr. Nico Calavita, and the planning director, Mike Hansen, and Michael Prince. I hope you're involved in that a little bit. The other name for that is called community benefit zoning. And clearly, if we're going to be upzoning and incentivizing and things, the community can receive benefits from that. Now, is one example, the mention was made about park credit. So clearly, if a developer is going to allow a sizable open space, maybe 30 feet or something, he probably wants a credit for impact fees. We have to be careful there, because if a developer wants a lot of credit against impact fees, that means he's not going to be paying impact fees that go for the larger parks that are in our community plan. So the whole question of who benefits from upzoning is going to be a major issue. I was happy to hear the consultants mention setbacks, because I think they're crucial. When North Park and Uptown did the community plans in 2016, I believe that we did a terrible job on the zoning. So I was kind of shocked when the whole plan was done. One of the key North Park urban planning participants said, I think the commercial zoning we've chosen is totally unsuitable for North Park. And I said, well, that probably should have come up during the 7 years. So I am all for analyzing zone CC38, zone CC39. The 0 setbacks are completely incompatible with everything the consultants have shown today. So that's all. I do want to take a close look at community benefit zoning and setbacks. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Do we have any other subcommittee members that want to speak on at this point? I did have a slight comment. Can you go to the one that shows the east side of Hillcrest? Yeah, that's the one right there. It's interesting that this view of the world is still car-centric. So here we're talking about pedestrian-oriented kind of stuff. And the one thing that's most pedestrian, the one alleyway that would be the most pedestrian, the one connection that would be the most pedestrian, isn't even highlighted here. And I might be biased since I happen to live on it. But you got the Vermont Street Bridge that connects all the way down to a finger of Balboa Park. And from a pedestrian perspective, that would be the way you would walk from any of the neighborhoods from University Heights to go to, that's the way I would walk to go to Bankers Hill, cutting through the park. So it's just interesting that that's not seen, because we're not thinking as a pedestrian would think, we're thinking as a driver would think. So that would just be my comment there. I would echo Tom's comments about, the benefits are going to developers if we increase the density. We need to do the other side of it. I disagree with Clint's comments in that if you don't do both, if you don't have both park space and redevelopment and density, you're not going to have a balanced plan. You're not planning. You're not going to have an environment that you really want to live in. That would be my only comment. All right, Michael, did you want to respond to the things you've heard?
Yes, I will just respond by saying comment noted. No, I'm just joking. So I wanted to first respond by saying what Clint said is way better than what I could say. So I apologize profusely for the security lapses that resulted in that is not representative of the city and of this board. And I'm greatly appreciative to everybody for the, sort of working through this tonight and the hiccups that we had. So I wanted to start with that. There were a number of comments from Sanjay regarding connections beyond just the focused amendment area into Mission Hills. Yes, that is part of the component that will be involved in looking at mobility improvements. They don't just stop at the boundaries, and so we will look at how those connections could continue, for example, along University Avenue, along First, east-west, north-south, outside of the areas that is a component of the work that we're going to be evaluating and see where those connections can be made. As it relates to coordination with the hospital, Scripps Mercy complex and UCSD, we have had regular coordination with both entities. Obviously the UCSD, they control their campus. They do have a green space. We did have a slide that sort of showed that, but it was really wanted to focus on some of the other efforts that, we've been working on, but we are aware of their sort of central green space that is being planned as part of this effort, as part of their long range development plan. And really what our goal is sort of in the public rights of way within the broader medical complex, how can we improve that to address access to it? And as the Scripps Mercy campus project is going through its development process, we have comments that relate to how the public realm can be improved as they're looking to expand and add capacity to that facility. What are the ways that they can improve the public right of way that are consistent with the overall goals of this effort, and also, with the goals and policies of the community plan that apply and that have been adopted through the plan update effort. So hopefully I covered some of the components that were sort of Sanjay's question and comment, as well as I know Carol's components, but we do have regular coordination with them. And then the implementation of those in terms of, maintenance and facilities related to that, those will be addressed at the design stage as well. And then, implementation by those entities. There were a number of comments, and I'm sorry if I missed some of these too. I know that Clint mentioned tree maintenance in one of his comments, as well as about major street corridors and ensuring that they're not sort of just vehicle-centric corridors. And yeah, and I think really, the intent of that, just to echo what he said, was that we are not looking to necessarily prioritize those for vehicle space. We want to have a balanced multimodal system, and that where we can provide better opportunities for public space, if that means utilizing sort of the existing right of way. So for example, like the parking lane, if we can, better utilize that for either improved bicycle facilities, like what's being done on 4th and 5th through Sandag's project, or if there's the ability to expand that for a multi-use path or an expanded parkway, so a double row of street trees. Those are things that we're going to sort of look at in more detail as we move into the next phase. The broader comments that were addressed by Breer and Tom and Roy regarding implementation and value capture and setbacks. First, regarding Professor Calavita, I have, spoken to Professor Calavita recently, and other than being one of his poorer students and him reminding me of that, my sort of role in conversing with him is basically just been to direct him to Mike Hansen questions he had related to housing. So with that said, as it relates to sort of the broader setback discussion, what we are doing, that's sort of the purpose of this effort, is what can we do to sort of address public space. And one of the options that we do have is to establish that through changes to the current community plan implementation overlay zone in Uptown. And so I think that the setback requirement that we were addressing here and where that could be implemented, it could be implemented through the CPAWS or changes to the zoning consistent with the focused amendment process. And so we've done this in other areas as part of the Balboa specific plan, where we've required expanded right-of-way and multi-use path and an expanded furnishing zone and parkway. We've required this as part of the midway effort, and we anticipate that that's a concept that will be presented to the community in detail as we look to sort of evaluate where does this make most sense and what is that width specifically that can work, because what works along the north side of University Avenue is not going to be the same thing that'll work on Fifth Avenue. I think really we wanted to say that these are our concepts and we could potentially get these level of widths as part of new development. And so I would say that that's kind of the broader sort of bigger picture scope as it relates to value, the value capture discussion. So we are a part of that, but that this effort is really about, we know that we need to add housing. We know that we need to, you know, add public space. And so as we see that housing come in, what are the parameters that we can establish such that new development will then provide those public space amenities that not only ensures that that development can be built given sort of the, you know, the conditions that need to occur, but also sort of having that public space that can occur and make sort of the area that we want to see. Again, a long-winded way of probably just saying that your comments are correct and we understand them and we want to work through and sort of see where these can go specifically and how they can be written into the draft plan for further review at a future meeting. And then I appreciate the specificity of the comments from Breer and Roy related to adding connections, particularly on Vermont Street and some of the other places where public parks may, or public spaces may work well and where they may not work well. And so we'll look to refine those maps and then bring back concepts, you know, related to that. So I just spent a fair amount of time just kind of talking for a while, but I want to see if Scott or Brad has anything that they want to add to that.
Yeah, one thing I was going to add quickly, some of the public restroom comments and sort of the idea of having kind of larger park spaces, just to kind of, you know, put a little point on these little green dots aren't necessarily indicative of sort of the size of the parcel, that some of these actually are larger parcels that could have larger spaces, and that basically the definition of mini park, you know, in the city term is sort of under 2 acres. So not to say these are all going to be that large, but, you know, there definitely are, you know, availability for restrooms and things in a lot of these, not to say that we'll necessarily be identifying public restrooms in parcels or parks or anything at this point in time, but just note that they, you know, there's definitely opportunities for public restrooms in a lot of these locations.
Okay. Is there, Scott, did you want to, do I not have you do that?
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate some of the comments we had about corridors that we're going to look to add, not only Vermont and Washington, or rather universities that heads west towards Mission Hills, but we'll also look at, you know, parks that are outside of the focus plan area boundary that are in the Uptown Community Plan, to see if, you know, maybe there's another corridor or two that we want to make sure that we have connection to some of the parks that are proposed outside of the zone.
And Roy, did you want to have some follow? I mean, we have a little bit of time, so I don't know if there's other people who, Tom, do you have your hand up again? Are you looking to speak?
Well, before we do that, so was there any more presentation, or was that the end of the presentation?
You know, I can sort of cover my point on the last 5 minutes. You know, I think we have a little bit of time left if there's any sort of follow-up questions or comments to sort of the stuff that we've presented, or a little bit further on that. Mine's really more of a next steps component of the presentation.
Okay, so we'll go for another round of some comments, I guess, at this point. Who would like to speak?
I
Raise your
think
hand.
Tom had his. Tom, did you want to speak again? No? Okay. Breer.
Sorry, if my hand was up, I apologize. I'll take it down. I didn't lower it.
Okay. So Michael, I think you can go to your next step.
Okay. So the next steps are you know, obviously we're sort of still in the concept development phase. The April meeting will cover land use and building design. And we want to basically further sort of the discussion that we had here tonight, as well as the discussion from the February meeting, and looking at sort of what those options could be as part of the proposed land uses and proposed building design concepts, and sort of taking that information into account. At the May meeting, we want to cover mobility concepts for, other areas that were covered that we didn't get a chance to cover at the previous mobility meeting, sort of looking at, roadways other than university. And then finally in June, we want to discuss the LGBTQ plus cultural and historical district concepts and the historic context statement that is being prepared. And so we plan to present that in June. And if there are any changes or updates to the schedule, we will adjust those and let you know at the next meeting. One thing is that though probably not great that I set this up as a recurring meeting given the Zoom bomb, but we do have this as the Zoom credentials will remain the same. It's the third meeting of the month. The third Thursday of the month at 6:30 p.m. is our next meeting. If you can go to the next slide, please. So here's how to stay involved. The website is we'll post the presentation and the recording materials, and our contact information is here. And with that, I do see that Matt Wallstrom said he had one more comment or question before adjourning. He did say that it's a concern regarding the CPAWS as a tool when it was pointed out at the last meeting on urban design that design is not a component of the overlay zone, but it could be added in the future. Seems like this whole plan redo is two-step and trusting in a future effort rather than definite. And so I think that, just my response to that would be that this process is to define those regulations. We first wanted to evaluate the concepts to see if they make sense, where those could occur, and then move forward with the specifics at a later meeting. And then Matt sort of said we spoke in the prior meeting of the ideas of integrating art, color, and design to bring forth the feeling of Hillcrest in the development process. That's a good comment as well, and something that, again, can be a component. Obviously, we have policies in the plan that talk about using, quality building materials and colors, but ways that we can sort of further those policies and efforts to further define the community as something that and identify Hillcrest as a key component of this effort. Yes, Matt wrote in the chat, may I ask one last question? And yes, you can, of course. Let's see if there's anybody else with their hand raised as well.
It looks like we have Mary again.
Mary. Yes, the planned Hillcrest website went down last Saturday for 4 days after the address was apparently not renewed in the time for domain squatter to take it over. How much did it cost for the city to have to buy it back? Again, I think there was just a domain renewal, but to my understanding, there was no charge or increased fee. I'm not aware of anything related to that. We've checked with our team, and thus far it was just sort of a renewal error, but I'm not aware of any charges. If my information is incorrect, I will follow up at the next meeting with correct information. But as I understand it, there was no increased charge to getting the domain name. You're welcome for your response. So with that, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you have any closing comments or questions.
No, I'm good.
All right.
It's okay to be done a couple minutes early.
I agree. So again, apologies to everyone for the Zoom bomb again, and I'll make sure that next month the credentials are tighter. And I appreciate everybody being here. We look forward to sort of refining those concepts and presenting a little bit further. Thank you to Scott and Brad for all the work that you did in this presentation. Thank you to Gabriella as well for all of the work that Gabriella's done, a lot of back end work as well. And to the whole city team, and thank you to the subcommittee members and the public. It's always appreciative that we can do this, and who knows, maybe in a few months we can do it in person. Probably we'll be in Zoom for a little bit, but one can only hope. So thank you all. Enjoy your evening, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Have a good night.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Brad.